Boy, it turned out to be a nice day.
Yes.
And that rain was so needed. We've been in a record drought, 140-year record.
Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting summer for fire.
Yes, it is. It might rain all summer. I'll let you know in November.
Yeah.
You've had these every year in the recent 10 years or so. Oh, it's going to be a terrible fire season. Well, they have had some terrible fire seasons, but they were predicting them early on, and it used to be a fire season every third year, and now there's every year. That's what I did for a living for 35 years.
Ray, we've got some questions here that we'll ask you, but your answers you can take them wherever you want.
Yeah.
So
I can remove my glasses if you want. Okay?
So the first one really is, and I think you're starting to get at this right now, it has to do with your experience as a lookout. We know you're up at Heaven's Gate. And so we're wondering if you could just talk about what a fire lookout is to you, and what the job of a fire lookout is.
Well, my interest started when I was 4 years old. My dad was a radio technician for what was then the Washington State Division of Forestry. He worked out of Olympia. He had two other guys that did all the radio work in the state. Of course, radios were new back then. But it was during the war, and they were putting up lookouts 12 months of the year, on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And their purpose was to watch for enemy aircraft, because we had no radar system and no other means to detect enemy attack from the air. So that was the purpose of the lookouts in the wintertime and off season then. But lookouts have been around since 1902. The first one was on Bertha Hill out of Headquarters, Idaho. In 1902, a lady went up, she was the camp cook, and every morning after doing dishes at a logging camp, or a timber cruising camp is what it was, she would hop on her pony and ride to the top of this little knoll that's just a bump off to the side of Bertha Hill today. She would climb a tree and sit there and watch for smoke. When she spotted one, she'd hop on her pony and go round up the timber crew. That was the beginning of fire lookouts, 1902, right there in Idaho. My beginning was, as I said, 4 years old. I tagged along with my dad one day when he was installing a radio antenna on the top of this particular lookout tower when it was 100 feet tall. He was climbing around on the catwalk and on the railings, rigging this antenna. And I was sitting on the ground eating lunch, and my lunch was being served by the lookout. Going back to lookouts, the title. Lookout represents the structure, the site, and also the person staffing it. They called them lookouts. Anyway, the lookout was fixing my lunch for me, and it happened to be K rations. And that's when I learned real early on that if those soldiers in those foxholes overseas were living on K rations, we're going to lose this war, because they're the most horrible thing on earth to eat. But when I was 16, I got hired as a lookout by the state of Washington. In Okanagan County, it was called Eneas Mountain. And I went up in June, stayed all summer, came down when it was time to go to school in 1st September. And that's the way lookouts were staffed back then. You went up for the summer. Well, when I'd spot a fire, I'd get itchy feet. I wanted to go fight it. So for the next 35 years, I was a firefighter. And when I retired from the Spokane Fire Department in 1988, I got the job on Heaven's Gate lookout, overlooking Hell's Canyon from the Seven Devils. And Heaven's Gate, to me, was a real challenge, and of all the lookouts I could have staffed, because I'd written a book on them, and so I guess I was in somewhat demand. But I wanted Heaven's Gate because it represents 3 total areas of the United States Forest Service. I mean, 3 worlds of the United States Forest Service. It's in Region 1 that encompasses northern Idaho and all of Montana. It looks into Region 6 that represents all of Oregon and Washington. Everything on the west side of the Snake River was in Region 6. And it looked into Region 4, which represents southern Idaho. And I could see the area around McCall and New Meadows and all that area real well. So here were 3 regions of the Forest Service. 1 radio in one corner, 1 radio in another corner, and a 3rd radio in the 3rd corner. And they had nothing to do with each other, really. And not only that, but I was representing 3 national forests. So here you have 3 distinct national forests in 3 distinct regions of the Forest Service. So that was quite a challenge, because they all think different. And in 1988, they were all looking at fire different. They had just come out with this new theory, and it was referred to early on as the let burn theory. And what it meant was, fires in certain areas we can allow to let burn because it's good for the forest. And they're even going so far as to say Smokey Bear was the bad guy. So we had Yellowstone Park burned. Humongous big clouds of smoke would come out on a daily basis from the great wilderness of the Idaho wilderness, Frank Church wilderness area, and the Selway wilderness. You're looking at 2 million acres there. And on a daily basis, these humongous clouds are coming out of it, and not a word said on the radio. Let burn. And while I was on Heaven's Gate, I had 13 fires that I reported on the Region 6 side. That was in Oregon. And since I was there as a volunteer, I didn't want to be paid. I wanted to be there as a volunteer so I could sort of think for myself a lot. And I was turning in smokes over in Oregon, and they were taking no action on them until one of their own lookouts spotted it. And I thought that was a little bit annoying. Finally, the wolf got the sheep on the 13th fire. I had seen this lightning touch down. It was 34 miles away from me, way up by the Washington line in Oregon. I saw the black smoke come up from it, so that indicated it hit a pitch pocket in a tree. And 34 miles away, that's a long stretch. So I was watching it with binoculars, and pretty soon it went out. Well, it went down. Smoke went away anyway. Not a word on the radio about anybody going to it. The next morning, about 10 o'clock, this was almost 24 hours later, that fire blew up. And it burned in the neighborhood of 60,000 acres. It killed 200 cows. It destroyed over 200 miles of farmer's fence. It wiped out 2 farm houses and ranches. And it was a lead burn fire. So I started documenting it. And I wrote a letter to the fire management head for the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest in La Grande, and I got no response. I just explained what I'd seen happen. But after that fire had blown up that day, the second day, the next night it was still blowing. And there was still no traffic whatsoever on the radio, and I was monitoring all the radios. 5 o'clock this next morning, the radio came to life from the fire. And it was a guy trying to reach the district at the town down by Joseph, Enterprise, right? Yeah. And no response. Well, they couldn't hear each other is what the problem was, but I could relay. I heard them both. So I started relaying his order for equipment. And that's when I first learned that there were people on that fire. It was the third day. He was ordering gunny sacks. And I thought, why gunny sacks? He had a southern accent. And he ordered 50 fire shirts, yellow fire shirts. That's when I knew there were a bunch of people on that fire. 50 gunny sacks, 50 fire shirts. He was going to fight that fire with gunny sacks. Well, that's what they do down in Tennessee. It turned out that's where he was from. Well, after seeing what happened at that fire, like I said, I documented it. I wrote a letter, went unanswered. I wrote another letter higher up, it went unanswered. I wrote another letter, third level higher, no answer. So I wrote to Congressman Tom Foley in Washington, D.C., and things happened real quick. They got sued. The Forest Service got sued for allowing the fire to destroy 200 cows and 2 ranches and 200 fences, 200 miles of fences. They turned around and got sued again for planting along the roadsides noxious weeds. So here they get sued twice for the same fire. Well, the reason I'm telling this story, I really kind of wanted to go back to Heaven's Gate Lookout the next year, but I burnt my bridges. And that ended my career in Heaven's Gate. Well, it was a bittersweet summer. I learned a lot, and I had some interesting experiences. I got struck by lightning. My dog's nose got bit by the lightning bolt. The propane refrigerator burned up, blew up, and my radios all went dead. When my dog got bit on the nose, she was laying about a foot away from the front of the little refrigerators. They're apartment-sized refrigerators, about window sill level. And a ball of fire came out of the back of that like an M80 firecracker. The dog survived. I survived. The feeling you have when you're struck by lightning in a lookout is best told as being inside a light bulb when somebody turns it on. There's a strong smell of ozone, and it soon drifts away, and then you're fine. Because lookouts are grounded with quarter-inch solid copper down each side, down each corner from the peak of the roof, and lightning ground goes down over the hill 4 directions until it finds moisture. So you're safe in a lookout. I had a lot of experience with visitors. There were...
Ray, sorry to interrupt. Could you just say something briefly about the moments leading up to that storm, or that when you were struck by lightning?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because this was a clear day. And the overhang on the roof shielded you from the direct sky, you know, at an angle about like that from what you're looking at. And a little cloud formed right overhead, and it had one lightning bolt in it. And I had some visitors that had just left and had walked back down to their car. It's a half-mile down to the car from the lookout, half-mile trail. And they happened to be looking up at the lookout when that lightning struck. And he says it was a direct hit, because he came back up to make sure I was okay. They said it struck that antenna and went right down that antenna. And it blew out all the radios. But leading up to it, you had absolutely no warning whatsoever. I had no idea there was going to be a lightning strike. It was all forming overhead at 8,400 feet elevation. And that happens at that elevation. Little cloud will form just right there. And that wasn't the first time I was struck. I was struck the first year I was on a lookout too. I was talking on the radio at that time, and it knocked me on the floor. But I got up, you know, a few minutes later, I was fine. Haven't been fine since, but it's one of those things that scare the Jesus out of you, but in retrospect, it's an experience that I'm glad I had.
Ray, could you maybe just quickly try to describe the view you had from Heaven's Gate?
There are books written in Japanese and German languages, tourist guides, what to see in America. And each of those two books that I was aware of described Hell's Canyon as the deepest trench in America, and you got to see it. So they come to Heaven's Gate to see it. Well, I would think they'd be disappointed, because you can't see Hell's Canyon from Heaven's Gate. You can't see the river anyway. You can see down in the canyon, yes, but you can't see the river at any place. You can from across the river at Hat Point. So if I were to steer a tourist to see the deepest canyon, I would have sent them to Hat Point, because you can look right down at the river from Hat Point in Oregon. But I got a lot of visitors. I got them from every state but Nebraska. And I got them from 28 foreign countries. And I guess it was a result of the tour guides that are written on what to see in America. I enjoyed most of them. Almost all of them I enjoyed. And I think it was because that half-mile walk up from the car takes it out of those that you wouldn't have enjoyed. I did not enjoy the horses coming up, because in the heat of later summer, they would tie them up just below the lookout, and then I'd have horsefly problems for the rest of the summer. So I put up a sign about 1/8 of a mile down the trail where they could tie up. I put up hitching posts for them and everything, and the Horsemen's Association got annoyed by that and went to the Forest Service. This guy puts up signs and says we can't go there. Well, you can walk there that last 1/8 mile, but they're the only ones I didn't enjoy. The view was outstanding. I could see mountain goats over on the Seven Devils. The Seven Devils are 9,400 feet elevation, and Heaven's Gate Lookout is at the north end of them, a mile from the highest ones, at 8,400 feet. So you're looking right up at the Seven Devils. I had eagles, I had marmots, I had pikas for pets, golden mantled squirrels for pets, and I really enjoyed that lookout. It was to me, it was the El Primo of lookouts, because it did represent 3 total different worlds of the U.S. Forest Service. I got along great with the 2 other national forests, but the one over in Oregon I burnt my bridges with.
Do you have a favorite story or memory from your time as a lookout?
Well, the lightning storms are really something to see.
Yeah.
When you see lightning pounding a landscape, I mean just pounding it with strikes that just go down like this, you know, and it seemed to last for seconds. And then a big fireball, and a pocket of little steam will come up, and then smoke, of course. That gets your adrenaline going. You want to be on the radio quick, be the first one to see it. Because being first to report a fire is your goal. You want to beat the air patrol plane. You want to beat all the other lookouts. And I beat a lot of them out of it, because I was up early in the morning and I went to bed late at night watching smoke, watching forest smoke. But one thing you learn that you don't do is you don't jump on the radio and report a fire right under another lookout. You call that lookout first and ask them can you see a smoke down there, you know, off to your north a little bit? And you give them a chance to look at it first. Because it's an insult to, you know, report a fire under another lookout. Give them a chance to see it too. And then you give them the cross reading on it. That's what you do. But the most interesting moments, of course, are storms. And I loved a good lightning storm, but they did a lot of damage. The ones I enjoyed most were in June, before they, you know, did a lot of damage. They made good training fires in June, little fires. When they made a big fire, I don't like big fires. I was on plenty of big fires in my life, and I just seen they all stay small. Wildlife encounters, I never had a wildlife encounter in my life. To be afraid of grizzly bears, no. Be afraid of the dark, no. I enjoy the dark. You know, you can see the strangest things at night from a lookout. A lot of meteor showers, and once in a while a phenomenon that they call UFOs. I saw a few that I just figured were probably our own military out testing stuff. I wouldn't call them something from outer space, because I don't think maybe they did. Maybe foreign countries did have stuff in outer space then. But I don't recall anything that was really scary. Although I've interviewed a lot of people when I was writing my book that told stories of flying saucers, and one stands out in particular down a lookout near Mount Adams, flat top lookout out of Trout Creek, Washington. This couple was there, it was back in the late 40s, and this guy stood up in an audience of at a Fire Lookout Association convention. His wife sat right there and confirmed everything he said. She saw it too. A hovering saucer, just like the people would describe a flying saucer, had lights all around it. And it hovered over in one spot for long, long moments. And they both swear they saw that thing, and it was enormous. And I believe them. There were other lookouts on the Yakima Indian Reservation that saw a very strange phenomenon too at night. They would see what appeared to be headlights, or there were no roads around the base of Mount Adams. And that was later identified to be, they call them Earth lights, I think. And it's a magnetic attraction that Mount Adams has. And it causes these Earth lights. They look like headlights. They'll dance around out in the woods. And this lady saw them regularly, and she had, when her grandkids were up there with her, they saw them. And more unidentified flying objects. I've heard a lot of stories of that people had on lookouts. You know, when you're alone for 3 months, you might see only a dozen people. And your mind can go kind of squirrely. And it affects a lot of people pretty strangely. In fact, it sets some of them off their rocker. They have to go up and haul them down in a basket. They completely lose it. The lookouts used to take the weather, and we would take it at noon every day and then turn it in on the radio, and it would go to a fielding center back in I think in Missouri, somewhere in the Midwest. And then it would come back an hour later as tomorrow's fire weather forecast. It's all done by satellite now and the Weather Service. But there's an instrument that you always had to collect the relative humidity with, and it's called a sling psychrometer. It's got 2 bulb thermometers on a bar and a handle that you swing around in circles. After dipping one of the thermometer bulbs in a little bowl of water, it's got a wick on it. One of them had a wick and one was dry. Well, when you swing that around for a minute, it gives you 2 temperature readings, a wet bulb and dry bulb, and you take those 2 together and add them on a chart, and you get the relative humidity. Well, this lady, a young gal, high school gal, about the same age I was, sophomores in high school, she right away broke hers. She hit something with it and broke it. So she called in, they sent up a new one. And 3 days later, she called in again. I broke another psychrometer bulb. So they brought her up another one. And after the 3rd one, in about 10 days, she never broke anymore. But at the end of the fire season, they had a party, and she confessed at that party that her psychrometer had been broke all summer. But she just could not get on the radio and ask for another one. We had 5 lookouts that all turned in the weather, and she was number 4. So she took the average of the first 3, and that was her humidity every day. But little things like that, you know. I was a terrible cook. I about starved to death. I couldn't boil water.
What do you miss most about your time as a lookout?
The sunrises and the sunsets. Everyone's different. I went up on Sundance Lookout for a couple of summers as a volunteer here a few years ago, right after my wife passed away, and I really enjoyed Sundance, all but the crazy four-wheelers that come up in the middle of the night from Priest Lake. But I just missed the sunrises and the sunsets more than anything, and they're just really something to behold from a lookout. I must have 1,000 pictures of them. And from Heaven's Gate, it was 8,400 feet, so there was some interesting weather that we had. On the 4th of July, I had a blizzard. And on the day before Labor Day, I had huge fires going, and the next day I had snow. I could have sold a lot of flocked Christmas trees that day. Boy, it was beautiful. All the ice on the, the frost, hoarfrost that gathers on an evergreen tree, small evergreens, looked just like a flocked Christmas tree. Of course, that went away the minute the sun came out. But I would say that's what I missed the most. Yeah.
I have one more question here. Part of something that we're really interested in the project that we're doing is the transition away from fire lookouts towards using new technology to locate fires, and kind of the way in which the lookout is becoming, or seems to become, is becoming more obsolete, is being used for different purposes like Airbnb, lodgings, and so we're curious to know what you think is lost, perhaps, in the transition away from the human fire lookout.
I'm really glad you asked that question. Air Patrol goes back to the 1930s when they had sport planes, and biplanes, and in the 1950s, Air Patrol really caught on. They would put up a plane, say out of Coeur d'Alene. It would go up about 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock. It would fly the entire area to the Canadian border from Coeur d'Alene. The Coeur d'Alene Forest, the Knesek Forest, everything to Canada. And for how long are you going to see any acre of that you're looking at when you're flying over it? A second is it. And lightning has a tendency, especially in northern Idaho, to put out sleeper fires, where you get a good rain, a good soaking rain after the lightning, and it'll put the smoke down right away. A lookout's going to see that when it comes up first. And it'll come up maybe 3 o'clock in the afternoon every day, come up, just put up a few puffs of smoke and die down again. It'll do that for 10, 15 days. The Sundance fire did that. An Air Patrol plane with just 2 sets of eyes in it are not going to see any given area long enough to catch a sleeper fire. And it's the sleeper fires that when they do take off, 2 weeks later, when it dries up and gets, bone dry again, and the wind hits it, and they're going to go. So you better have somebody see it quick. Well, there's where the lookouts are important. And back when we had plenty of lookouts, you didn't necessarily even have to be able to identify the exact location of it, because I could shoot an azimuth out there like that, and this lookout over here can shoot another azimuth, and where they cross, those two azimuth readings are going to be where that fire is. And that pinpoints it, especially if you got a nice angle, If you're like this, it's not so hot, but this way. And back in the day when there were lookouts that could do that on any smoke, it pinpointed them right to the notch. And that's been lost when they started reducing lookouts. Well, the cost of air patrol is significant compared to the cost of manning a lookout. So they only put up an air patrol at most once a day. And except out of Coeur d'Alene, they've been known to put up 2 a day after lightning. But forests like the Colville, they'll go 2 weeks without putting up an air patrol. And who's going to see it? Well, today with people wandering around the woods with their cell phones and GPS, it's great if you can have cell coverage, get a GPS rating if you're sitting on the fire. But if you're sitting 2 miles away from it and you don't know which direction it is for sure, you think it might be north or east, and you get on your phone and you call in a fire, I've got a GPS reading of so-and-so and I'm sitting here. I'm looking, I think I'm looking north, but I might be looking east. There's a fire out there. Well, how far is it? Well, it looks like, see, they're not accurate. And there's another thing that's a factor that needs to be looked at that hasn't been. The urban interface moving of people out into the country. You've seen houses everywhere in the woods now. Those people, most of them work in town to pay for that nice home out in the woods. They're not even there in the daytime. So who's going to see the fire that's on their property? Satellites, absolutely, has never been fire detected from a satellite. Commercial aircraft, yes, they can pinpoint one. The latest thing is replacing manned lookouts with cameras. Down in Oregon, southern Oregon, they replaced almost all their lookouts with cameras, and they've proven to be somewhat effective. But you have to have a person in that dispatch desk, in the dispatch room, watching a screen, because that camera makes you rotate about once a minute. Makes a circle about once a minute. And you got to catch it when it's got to be big enough smoke to see in the first place with a camera. Cameras are questionable. They haven't really been perfected yet. The best of all worlds, the guy out there with the cell phone with GPS, the air patrol, and the lookout all combined. There you got the best. Can't we afford the best today? It's always been my argument. Doesn't hold much water. But that would be the best of all worlds. As far as another use for lookouts, when We were at a fire lookout conference down in Oak Ridge, Oregon in 1994. And we were trying to figure out how we can save these lookouts. Because the Lookout Association, we have been maintaining them, we've been restoring them. And a guy stood up and he says, "Have you ever thought about renting out lookouts?" And we laughed. We thought that was the funniest thing we ever heard. Who in the hell is going to spend $50 to sleep in a lookout? Boy, were we wrong. There's about 40 plus lookouts on the rental system now. And they're all book solid. And the highest priced one I know of is right out here on Mount Spokane. And last I heard it was $110 a night, and that was last year. Who knows what it is this year. And book solid. You can't even get in unless you got your finger on the button at 7 o'clock in the morning. That first day, the registration's open. You mentioned Airbnb.
Yeah.
I know the lady that owns that Airbnb lookout, and she bought it for a pretty good sum of money. My son sold that lookout for I think $6,000. He built it in 1993. He moved it there from a place called Stranger Lookout up by Chihuahua, Washington. And he owned it for about 7-8 years and sold it, and it was on the market for sale for a long time after that. After the second owner, who had it as a handicapped accessible hunting cabin. So people with handicaps that could climb stairs could sit up there and shoot a deer or maybe an elk. He had it for a number of years, and then he gave it up because it was becoming a vandal problem. That's the only Airbnb one I know of.
What do you think is so appealing about them? Why are people so attracted to go out and stay in these fire lookouts?
Well, you know, when we started having to rent a lookout or a campground by reservation only, people thought, well, you know, here I am reserving this darn campsite for maybe 6 months in advance, and maybe I can't even go there. And when wind got out that you could maybe rent a lookout and have a whole mountain to yourself. And some of the lookout, the rentals, even have locked gates behind them that you can lock to have the whole mountain to yourself. That's the appeal. People have come from all over the world to do it too.
Just real quick, because we forgot to do this in the beginning, would you just introduce yourself and just your name, where you're from, and just quickly your involvement with fire lookouts?
Hi, I'm Ray Kresek. I live in Spokane, Washington, and I wrote a book back in 1984 called Fire Lookouts of the Northwest. And from that, I think I created a monster. It ended up developing into a backyard museum of about 16,000 different relics from fire lookouts and the wildland fire profession. as things were being tossed out, they started handing them to me. And at first I thought, well, I don't, you can't be giving me this. You probably stole it. So it's a way of returning things that end up in the wrong hands. Because we're a nonprofit corporation, we have a board of directors of 11 people. And it'll stay here in my yard, open to the public by appointment only, for as long as I can do it. I'm 84 years old, so that's not going to be too much longer. And when that time comes, the lookout cab that you're looking at in the background is going to the Idaho Department of Land's office at Priest Lake, right at the end of the airstrip at Kavanaugh Bay. The remaining items, if it has U.S. Forest Service on it, like signs, a lot of the equipment, it still belongs to the Forest Service. And it may go to the museum in Missoula, the National Museum of Forest Service History. It may go to other museums, but the bulk of it's going to go to the Colville, Washington Museum. It's the Stevens County Historical Society. They have a 30-foot L4 lookout tower on the premises on a rockin' in the middle of downtown Colville. Perfect place for this museum. And all the paperwork is in order for them to receive it. So.
Could you tell us what kind of fire lookout tower we're looking at this right now?
The lookout behind me is known as the L6 model. And it dates back to 1931. In 1929, the Forest Service in Region 1 out of Missoula developed a pattern for lookouts, beginning with the L4, which is a 14-foot wide room that you can live in. The L5 looks just like it, but it's smaller, it's 10 feet. And then the L6 is only 8 feet wide. So the L6 was designed to go on tall towers. This one was on a 100-foot tall tower. It actually came from the ruins of 7 like it in the state of Washington. Prior to that, the most modern lookout was developed actually on top of Mount Hood in Oregon in 1915. It's called a cupola. It evolved about 4 years later into what was known as the D6 cupola under District 6 of the U.S. Forest Service, as it was known then. They call them regions now, Region 6. It was really a perfect lookout because you had an observation room upstairs. It's 1/4 the size of the living quarters downstairs, and you just had a ladder to go up to it. 12-foot room on the ground floor, windows all the way around, and windows all the way around in the cupola too. So you could sit up in the cupola part of the day, you could sit downstairs the rest of the time, and it was a solid comfort for a lookout. And that goes back to the earliest days, 1915 was when it was first designed. The ones with the windows all around came out in 1919, and there were a lot of those built. There's still a few of them in the country. Let's see, in Montana, there's 2 of them up by Eureka, one on Stall Peak, and the other one escapes me at the moment, but 2 of them in that area. They're becoming a thing of the past too, but there's a model of the D6 cupola in the museum at the flight museum at the airport at Missoula, and there's a full-scale L4 model in the smoke jump center at Missoula. And on the yard outside in front of the smoke jump base in Missoula is a cupola that was built out of logs. It's a full-scale model that was done with incredible like-kind material. It was done by a smoke jump base foreman. It's sitting out in the front yard. And it's built exact replica of Hornet Peak, which is north of, or just west of Polebridge, Montana, west of Glacier Park. There's a couple others I can't think of at the moment, of the cupola models. There's one over here in Washington, north of Winthrop, 20 miles, on a peak called North 20 Mile Peak, that one of our Lookout Museum members and Fire Lookout Association members took it upon himself to restore. It was built in 1923. It's a D6 cupola. He put $3,000 of his own money. We put $1,000, and the Lookout Association put in $1,000 to restore it. The Forest Service didn't put in a dime. And he fully restored that lookout with like-kind material, the best he could find. Alaska yellow cedar for shingles even. And he was just completing that restoration project. It's a 7-mile hike. He gained 1,000 feet or 4,000 feet. So it's quite an accomplishment to get all those materials up there alone. He was in the final stages of painting that lookout when the fires of 2015 hit Okanagan County and burned 200-some thousand acres. He got trapped in one of them trying to save his home, and he died in that fire. So we've taken that on as kind of a memorial to him, to find people that'll adopt it and maintain it, because Forest Service doesn't include it in their budget. It's the only D6 cupola that I know of that's like original. And it's pristine shape right now. There are a lot of L4s out there yet. There's only 2 of these left. One of them's on a place called Balancing Rock, northeast of headquarters, Idaho, overlooking the Clearwater. Be the North Fork of the Clearwater River. And the other one that I know of is on Elk Ridge, on the mountain that the big long tunnel goes through for the Burlington Northern Railroad south of Eureka. It's still standing. It was restored about 20 years ago. Those are the only 2 I know of. There were about 200 of these built.
Did you ever visit the lookout on Little Snowy Top Mountain before it burned down?
I did. And a story about that place. In 1969, I went hunting up the Salmo River in the corner of Washington where it meets Idaho and British Columbia. I was bear hunting, And God help me if I had shot a bear, because I'd have never got him out of there. But I noticed some survey stakes, freshly planted survey stakes, way down along the river. Well, the road's way up here on the divide, 3 miles away. What are these survey stakes doing here? So I followed them out, and they ended up, darned if they didn't end up right at the road. So I stopped at the ranger station at Sullivan Lake and talked to the district ranger, and he said, yeah, we're going to build a road down there. We're going to log that. There's some big cedar and some big white pine down there. I said, no, you're not. I happened to be, at the time, the president of the Spokane Mountaineers Club. We had about 300 members, and we're also members of the Federation of Western Outdoor Clubs that included Sierra Club and all those guys. Well, I was also on the committee called I was the Washington representative of the Federation of Western Outdoor Clubs that encompassed all these outdoor clubs, including Sierra Club. So I had a few whiskers that year. And so I pursued it. I took it to the region, or to the forest supervisor in Colville, and he confirmed me. He says, yeah, we already paid for the survey, and it cost us $80,000, and it's going to cost us about $800,000 to build a road down there, but we're going to get millions of dollars worth of logs out of there. And I was teaching at the community college at the time, and I had some students that wanted their 8 summer credits to do field work. And so I rounded up some increment bores. Most increment bores are only about that long. To bore into a tree to see, you pull out a core like a pencil to see the rings. Well, I managed to get a hold of 2 increment bores that were about almost 3 feet long, 2.5 feet long. And I sent these 2 kids down into the Salmo with green survey tape and compass, and they charted the location of about 100 of those trees, as I recall. All the biggest trees they could find. And when they bored them, the truth came out. The white pines were upwards of 6 feet, some of them. They were the biggest around. There were some huge white pines in there. But there were western red cedars that were exceeded 11 feet DBH, diameter breast height. And when they bored into those cedars, they went about that far and hit nothing but punk, which I kind of almost already knew, but apparently Forest Service didn't. I knew they knew it, but they wanted to log that area. But we brought proof that those trees are not worth what you think they are. Go down and check yourself, and they did. And they came back and whoops, a big whoops. So we launched. First, we wanted it to become a natural area. But a natural area can be changed simply with a signature by a forest supervisor, the next forest supervisor that comes along. So the other choice is wilderness area. Congress makes it wilderness forever. So we went for wilderness. And what really won the wilderness after 15 years of battle, and I had a stack that high of research done on it, was the fact that there was a caribou in there. Today, 15 years after the battle started, and it was a long, hard-fought battle. I got kicked out of towns. I got my tires punctured in Ione, Washington, and by loggers, thinking that we were going to put them out of work and they were starved to death if it became a wilderness. Well, today it's the San Juan Priest Wilderness. And Little Snowy Top is on the edge of it. So Little Snowy was one of the questions. Can it stay there? Because you don't have buildings in wilderness, but you can have one that's historic, that's been there, that served the purpose. And so we stayed in Little Snowy many a night when we were doing the study. We got the contract to do the trail maintenance. For half of what the trails were maintained, 42 miles of trails were maintained the year before all this fight began. As a result of the hearings, the subject came up, can't maintain trails in the wilderness because you can't use chainsaw. Well, who says you have to use chainsaw? They had used tote goats, these little fat-tired scooters, and I followed them out, and I was picking up parts all the way up the trail. Well, we bid half price what it cost that year to do it by hand, using crosscut saws. The logging championship team from community college in Spokane had some of the sharpest crosscut saws on earth, and I was able to check one out. And so we sent the 17-year-old kids to man the chainsaws, and the kids younger than that, they all got paid if they were under 18. And my little daughter, when she was 4 years old, had a pair of loppers going along trail crew, and every kid got paid. And we proved that you can do it with crosscut saw and hand tools, and do it better. Well, those were some of the things that were on our side, but it still took a battle of 15 years to get that wilderness. What happened to the cabin on Little Snowy, it was one of the early L4 models, 1931 model, where it had a gable roof instead of hip like this. There were some hunters that stayed in it one night, and they were met on the way out. Yes, we had a fire in the stove that night, and apparently it caught fire right after they left. It was either a stove fire, maybe a pack rat built a nest in the attic next to the pipe. Don't know. I don't believe it was arson.